Greetings. This is a day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. Thank you for joining us for this President's Day webinar, which we have titled From Maine to Minneapolis, Faith in a Fragile Democracy. There is little question that our country is experiencing a very difficult period, and that's being kind, a very difficult period of political, social, economic, and I would argue even spiritual upheaval. When people are afraid to go to church or to school or receive needed medical attention, when journalists are arrested for doing journalism, when the 5-year-olds are used as pawn to draw out their parents so that they can be arrested by Immigration Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, when people are murdered in broad daylight for going about everyday activities or exercising their constitutional rights, when people are detained, deported, and disappeared without due process and treated as if they are not children of God, when voting rights are on the line, when an entity of the government has a bigger budget than some nations, we know that we are living in a fragile democracy in a time of significant upheaval. It also tells us that authoritarianism is at our doorstep, and our system of government, our checks and balances, our norms in everyday life are not only under attack, they are in jeopardy. Isaiah 5, starting at verse 20, in the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition, says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight. Woe to those who are heroes in drinking wine and valiant at mixing drink, who acquit the guilty for a bribe and deprive the innocent of their rights." And so that feels like an appropriate scripture for context for this moment and for what we are facing. But today we have a panel of just people who are on the front lines of working in communities throughout our country, who are doing the work of resistance, of preparation, preparing congregations and people of faith and people in all across their communities to be able to respond to this moment. Today, we are recording on Abraham Lincoln's birthdays with the hopes that the better angels of our country will manifest themselves in this moment. This will be shown on President's Day as a way of really focusing in on the ways in which power in our country is being consolidated, the ways in which authoritarianism is rising, and the faithful responses that not only are we seeing and witnessing, but that we are able to participate in ourselves. So without further ado, I want to introduce a panel. The first group I will introduce will be talking voices of hope and resistance coming from really the front lines of some of the work that has been done. We'll first hear from Reverend Jane Fields, who is Executive Director of the Maine Council of Churches. She is an ordained Presbyterian PCUSA minister who has served in Presbyterian, Episcopal, Methodist, and Lutheran churches in New York, Connecticut, and Maine, and who has worked for domestic violence programs in New Jersey and Connecticut. We will also hear from Elder Suzanne Kelly, who is the CEO of the Minnesota Council of Churches. She most recently served as the Chief of Staff at the Center for Economic Inclusion, a Twin Cities-based nonprofit focused on closing racial wealth gaps and building equitable regional economies. She is a leader in her congregation, Christ Temple Apostolic Church in Roseville, Minnesota, which is part of the Minnesota Council of Churches. We will also hear from Reverend Quincy Worthington, who is pastor of Highland Park Presbyterian Church in Chicago and an organizer. He is a community organizer in the Chicago area. He's a regular presence at the Broadview U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Facility protests and throughout the country. He has helped lead prayerful public witness amid escalating state violence. His writing explores faith, witness, and the ways ordinary people resist dehumanization in public life. And we're glad to have him as well. And then we will hear from Sandy Ovaje, I'm sorry about that, Sandy Ovaje, who is a table setter, a faith-rooted organizer, and a practicing poet. She is the founder of Koyo Strategies, where she helps organizations create advocacy and training campaigns, from providing direct services to mobilizing communities. Sandy has been a leader in the immigration rights movement for over a decade. She is committed to pro-social systemic change and served as the former director of campaigns and mobilizing at Sojourners. Sandy believes in hearkening ancestral wisdom for our collective liberation. She's a native of Mexico City who loves gathering neighbors and strangers around homemade pozole. So thank you all. I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and I will turn it over to Reverend Jane Fields.
Thank you so much, Dr. Leslie. I'm going to share my screen as I begin and bring everybody greetings from Maine. Our Maine Council of Churches is an ecumenical coalition of 7 mainline Protestant denominations. We speak with the prophetic voice of faith in the public square. As you may know, we recently experienced an ice surge that had the despicable name Catch of the Day. It's no coincidence, I think, in God's mind anyway, that the lectionary for one of the Sundays when they were here was from Matthew, talking about Jesus saying, "I'll teach you how to fish for people." The most important thing to know about the resistance work being done by people of faith here in Maine is that it began long before that surge. Starting immediately after the presidential election in 2024, there was broad-based, faith-based organizing happening. And one of the immediate results was the establishment in partnership with other secular nonprofits of a ICE Watch hotline and training for operators and rapid responders. We at the council offered training in de-escalation and active bystanding, as well as nonviolent direct action. We got red cards, know your rights cards, into every congregation that we could in as many languages as we could. In January of 2025, we at the council hosted a series of town hall meetings about communities most at risk of harm from the incoming administration. And the first of those was about our immigrant siblings and neighbors, and more than 500 people attended. And we provided resources afterward that are still available on our website. We trained churches on how to organize their space in the event that an ICE agent appeared at their door. And I'm sure all of you have done the same in terms of what private spaces look like, what judicial warrants look like, who has consent, who has authority to grant consent. Then we began a weekly prayer vigil that happened outside the detention center in Cumberland County, which is part of Portland is part of that. And that has happened every Wednesday since, including Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, and was timed to coincide with the shift changes at the detention center so that we saw the people trapped in the system as workers as well as connected with the people inside that were detainees. And then the surge began on January 20th. One of the first things that happened is we were contacted by a business owner in a nearby town who had a significant percentage of his workers were immigrants. And he asked if clergy could come and form a human barrier that would block the view of ICE of the door so that his employees could come and go and feel safer about how they did that. You can hear more about that effort on NPR, who featured it in a story with the unfortunate headline, I think, "Maine Immigrants Protected by the God Squad." That was us. Around the same time, a group of us drafted an open letter to the state, and in about 18 hours garnered the signatures of more than 300 faith leaders around the state who signed on denouncing ICE and demanding that the surge end immediately. And then that Saturday, there was a rally in Lewiston, which was the other area, concentrated area of activity during the surge. It has a very high Somali population. The woman in the white robe and the red stole is Reverend Dr. Jody Hayashida, director of Multi-Faith Justice Maine, who organized a number of faith leaders, more than 70, who appeared on the stage with her. And that's me next to her. I was proud to stand with her at that event. And since then, there have been decentralized local grassroots efforts. On the 27th, there was a prayerful sit-in at Senator Collins' office in Portland, and she had 9 clergy people arrested that day for praying in her office and asking that the surge end and that funding to DHS be halted. And finally, right around the time that the surge was announced to be ending, there was a press conference of secular and faith-based organizations talking about next steps and what we need moving forward, including bond sponsors for all those who were detained. Of the 206 who were detained during the surge, 4 had quote unquote criminal records. 2 of them were simply for crossing the border more than once. So the lie that they were arresting criminals and the worst of the worst was just that, a lie. The vast majority of people detained and abducted and kidnapped and taken out of our state were not criminals. In the months ahead, we're looking to continue the work. We're doing potluck narrative change meetings around the state to try to transform the views of those who have problematic attitudes about their immigrant neighbors. And we're hosting Interfaith Alliance to come in and do a training on democracy, not theocracy, the connection between white Christian nationalism and authoritarianism, and what people of faith can do to thwart both of those things. It's been a busy time. We're all exhausted, but my heart and mind are with my brothers and sisters and siblings in Minnesota. We endured it for 2.5 weeks. They've been living in hell for more than 3 months. Thank you.
Thank you. Elder Suzanne Kelly, I'll turn it to you. You're on mute. Yep.
Great. Okay, I'll start over. Greetings from Minnesota. I join you today with good news for the first time in 2.5 months. Today we received word from our border czar, the national border czar, Tom Homan, who has been camped here in Minnesota, that they will begin a drawdown of what began as 150 immigration officers in normal times to a surge of more than 3,000 immigration officers patrolling our streets, terrorizing residents, not looking for the worst of the worst, but picking up immigrants and refugees, many of whom had green card status. And so what we saw beginning in December was a critical escalation up to 3,000 immigration officers here. They are now saying that they will draw down those over the next week. We hope that is so. But the damage really in Minnesota has already been done. We are traumatized. We have seen our children have to go to distance learning, just as they did with COVID, because they are afraid to go to school. We've had ICE agents come onto our school campuses, looking for students, harassing students and staff. We have had bus drivers with full busloads of children stopped on the streets and taken off the buses with the children left there with no adults. We have had families where the parents have been taken out of the homes and the children have been left in the homes with no supervision. Neighbors have had to step in. We have seen our church pews emptied. We have seen our BIPOC-owned businesses shuttered because staff are afraid to come to work. And then, if all of that was not enough disruption, we have lived through the trauma of seeing our neighbors Renee Good, and Alex Preddy gunned down by federal agents as they were going about their civic duty as constitutional observers. We have been traumatized, but as a community, we have never been stronger. We did not retreat. We did not turn on one another. But what we saw here in Minnesota was a huge interfaith effort to say enough is enough and we want ICE out. Now, for those of you who don't live in Minnesota, you probably wouldn't know this, but the ICE out phrase is one we use at the end of every winter when our largest lakes have no more ice or thinning of the ice so that boats can again return to the lakes. And so that phrase ICE out has dual meaning now for us in Minnesota. But this Operation Metro Surge that resulted in the death of our neighbors, the traumatization of children, of adults, of communities, whole neighborhoods, was met with peaceful resistance. We partnered with Faith in Action and Isaiah, Minnesota, who led a successful, hugely successful boycott, a strike, a one-day strike, where schools closed, businesses closed, and people did not go to work. They did not participate in any consumer activities. Instead, we joined together in the Minnesota cold and marched peacefully. More than 10,000 marched, rallied down at our sports arena, and then had a prayer vigil. It was a full day of coming together across faiths, across denominations, all to say we will not allow this to continue. We will live out the mandates of our teaching, that we are all our brothers and sisters keepers, that we are all human created in the image of God, and that no one is expendable. The numbers have put out by the government have said that 4,000 arrests have been made here in Minnesota. We cannot fact check that. We do not know it to be true. But we do know that in this time, people have shown up and we have grown our interfaith connections. We have had respectful conversations where people across differences have sat down together in church basements, in neighborhood centers to talk about why they have mistrust for one another and what they might do to move forward. This Sunday, we are having an event, Standing in the Gap for Our Children, where we are bringing together educators and clergy from across the state to sit together, to pray together, and to think about what next. How do we, even after the agents are gone, how do we begin to heal our communities? And how do we help our children to realize that they can still trust adults, that their schools are safe places, that their places of worship are safe places, that they are loved and cared for? That's what we are coming together to do. And that is the work that we will have to do for the months to come. We must begin to talk about repair, because what we have seen is families who have not been able to go out of their homes. And so again, clergy and other concerned citizens have not only donated groceries, but have actually started caravans to deliver groceries to homes. We have caravans that pick people up at their homes and drive them to work because they're afraid to go to work, or drive them to the doctor because they're afraid to go to medical appointments. And so this great coming together, I hope, will signal the start of something new in Minnesota, rather than defeating us, rather than sending a message to the world that the federal government has destroyed the fabric of our lives. We are saying no. We are stronger and more united than ever. And so as we think about what has happened, We are now going to look for solutions. We are now going to look for repair, restoration, and we are going to demand that as ICE agents are pulled out and all of those people leave our state, that the federal government pour into our state resources that we need to bring about this healing. And so we know that prayer has worked. We know that the resistance of marches has worked. We know that peaceful protest in ways that are loud and in ways that are quiet have worked. And we hope that they will work across this nation. We believe that Minnesota was a large test case, and we believe that we are victorious and that other cities who might experience this in the future can be victorious too if we lean into our faith, if we work across faith traditions, and if we stand united as one. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Quincy Worthington, who is in Chicago, where we first heard about some of the disturbing activities of ICE and what was happening. Reverend Quincy.
Thank you for having me. First, Elder Kelly, I had the honor of being up there for that march and was there on the ground the day that Alex Preddy was killed. And just know that Chicago and the resistance here stands with you all. I was overwhelmed by the kindness and toughness of the people of Minnesota and the faithfulness. And I just, it was an honor to be there with you all. And so thank you for that. Um, since the beginning, we've been kind of trying to shout at people that Chicago was going to be a test ground for how the rest of this operation was going to be conducted throughout the country. And what we found in Chicago was that our organizing efforts really took a very grassroots, organic method of autonomous groups collecting and organizing, putting together the rapid response teams, adopting tactics that I think we first saw in Los Angeles with the whistles. And it's turned into this multi-faith, broad coalition of people from all walks of life, trying to walk hand in hand with a common cause. And it's been a really beautiful thing to watch and to be a part of and to be a witness to. I think the panelists before me have kind of described the situation that we witnessed here in Chicago too. It's a tape we're seeing replaying over and over again. And so a lot of our job, now that it's been a little bit quieter after the drawdown, has been kind of multifaceted. One of the things that we're really pushing for and working hard to do is to build relationships now with communities and across communities, especially in this quiet time with I guess the fear and the knowledge, or the threat that they're going to come back in forces closer to what Minnesota saw rather than what we saw in the summer. It's been hard for us to wrap our minds around the fact that we had 250 to 350 Border Patrol and ICE agents running through Chicago this fall. And Minneapolis has seen about 3,000 in a city about a third of the size of us. And so to imagine the scope of that operation and to see it in practice was just abhorrent. And so what we're trying to do is build the relationships now and build that trust now between all communities, but especially more affluent communities and our immigrant communities in a way that they know that that trust is there. So when the time comes, that we can be called into community to support one another. Another thing that we've really been focusing on and are concerned about are some of the tactics we saw in Minnesota where, and we saw it play out a little bit in Chicago, where they would run spectacular operations in city centers and create a spectacle and draw all the protest and resistance forces into those areas while they would go out into smaller communities in the surrounding area and just run roughshod, abducting our neighbors and our loved ones. And so really what we've been trying to do is take what we've learned in our protests and in our resistance in the city of Chicago, and see how we can support and help other communities as they build their own support networks and their own forms of resistance, and help them figure out how to adapt tactics to work in their situation. So it's really been a time of relationship building, of organizing and planning and trying to strategize of what the resistance looks like. But I think the most important thing that we've been involved in these past few months, as we try and support other communities and other cities and other states, is uh, the clergy and the people of faith are starting to realize that we're in a very unique situation where it's not just enough to be against something. It's not just enough to be anti-fascism or against authoritarianism, but we need to world build. We need to start talking about what is it that we want this country and our community to look like when this is over, because we do believe we're going to win this. And we do believe that there will be a time where this ends. And we believe that because that's gospel, right? And so what we find in the gospel and in other places, and what we're starting to do in Chicago, is realize that it's not enough to be called out of empire. You have to be called into kingdom. And so what we're trying to do now is sit down and dream about the world we want and the world that we're fighting for. And I really think that's what gives us the courage and tenacity to continue to fight and to continue to have protest be an embodied prayer where we're praying for thy kingdom come and thy will be done. And it gives us the strength to fight empire and the hope that something better is going to happen. So thank you for having me.
I love that. Not enough to be called out of empire. You have to be called into kingdom. That is a whole word right there. Now I want to turn it over to Sandy Ovalle, and so that we can hear from you.
Thank you, Reverend Leslie. And thank you to our colleagues all over the nation. Yesterday, I was asked to reflect on how the children are. How are the children? A greeting shared in different cultures. And so this is what came. You ask how the children are. Do you mean the ones being held in Dili? Are we talking about 13-year-old Gustavo who wonders if he will be forgotten? Or 18-month-old Amelia who blows kisses and waves at the camera while in detention? Or is it about 15-year-old Alexander who encourages those detained to have patience? We could be released any day, he says. You ask how the children are. Do you mean the ones in schools, fearful their parents will be taken next? Or are you asking about those who've been hiding in a basement for a few months? Are you wondering about the siblings, now in custody of a priest, as their parents had been taken? You asked about the children, and I have a hard time locating which ones. You see, Brother Baldwin told us the children are always ours, every single one of them. But this nation has forgotten. We've thrown them in cells to avoid their gaze. We say, let us carry on with tax cuts for the rich and no medical care for the sick. Criminalize those who left all they knew to feed those they loved. You asked about the children, and the government says, mine sleep well at night. I am a part of the Congregation Action Network here in the DMV area of Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. And I mention these stories not to sensationalize suffering, but to point our attention where it matters, in human dignity, and particularly how we treat children and those who cannot speak for themselves. And here in the DMV area, these stories have been true. We have children who have been hiding in basements with their mom for months. We have children who have been, whose parents have been taken and are now in custody of local priests. Late August, we saw the deployment of the National Guard last year into our city of Washington, D.C., and a surge in detentions and fear of people walking out in the streets. What you have to understand about DC is that so many of our local parks are federal lands and that our city is over-policed. So we not only have our local police department, but other federal departments, the National Parks Police also operates here, and other departments are operating consistently. And so we saw a lot of this presence outside metro stations, outside of our local regular pathways. And all of this has caused a tremendous terror in our community. And these attacks are also not new to our community. We have been fighting to keep our families together and free for a long time. But what is new this time is the size, the speed, the cruelty of the tactics that have been coupled with the blatant endorsement of racial profiling and the promised impunity for those who act outside the law. But here in the DMV, through the Congregation Action Network and other communities, people of faith are finding ways to respond. And so Food Justice DMV is doing grocery deliveries with hundreds of volunteers to hundreds of people, families every week. Not only that, but we're also listing specific cases where rent and or medical care are of concern due to the detention of the main provider in a family. We also have a great accompaniment network, the DMV accompaniment network, that matches folks to be witnesses and supports families who have ICE check-ins or other interviews. And our solidarity has also been prophetic. We have been inviting others to turn away from cruelty through vigils that happen with regular frequency outside of immigration courts and in the streets, and also peace walks. Reverend Delonte Golston has been leading this effort with Ken and others around peace walks in different key areas of the cities. And so every month, a different area of the city is visited by tons of volunteers that pray around the city. And we cover these because we know that our fight today is not against flesh and blood, but it's against principalities, against evil forces that are launching this cruelty in our communities. The network that we have here is invested in fighting against this campaign of terror. And so there is constant communication and strategizing that are pushing also the local, the state, and the federal government to protect our communities. The governments are responding to a degree. So in Maryland, legislators recently passed bills that could end the police department's collaboration with ICE and could prohibit such contracts from being made in the future. And in Virginia, Governor Spanberger signed an executive order to end a directive to the Virginia State Police and the Virginia Department of Corrections to perform federal civil immigration responsibilities. And so they are resisting aiding an agenda of terror. And so we know that in these times, it's easy to be overwhelmed by the darkness. The levels of cruelty are incredible. The amount of change thrown at us can be so overwhelming. And yet I am reminded of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words. He said, I know somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. And so this is what I see in the Congregation Action Networks and others here in the DMV, that people are finding those stars. We know that we can dispel some of their fear and some of this powerlessness by doing something, by getting involved. And so I see incredible forms of creativity and energy and solidarity. People are finding the light and following it, whether it is through providing protection outside immigrant churches and walking around while the services or the masses are happening, or whether that is through showing up at demonstrations like the one that happened earlier today at the mall to request that no more funding will be given to ICE and to these tactics. And so we have a unique context because we are a local space that is also federally occupied. And in the midst of these, we're learning to resist and to deal with both the local and the federal at the same time. So we're finding the light through these connections. And I echo what has been said. The ways that the community has come in solidarity have been inspiring in the midst of all the cruelty that has been launched against our communities.
Thank you, Sandy. That was just so encouraging to hear from all of you. I'm moved. I was shouting and amening as you all were speaking. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. We'll hear more from you shortly, but I want to turn it over to my colleague, Reverend Audra Ray, who serves as our legislative consultant to take us through the next part of the program.
Thank you, Dr. Copeland. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Maria Steffen, with the Horizons Project. Dr. Maria J. Steffen is the co-lead and chief organizer at the Horizons Project, an initiative focused on strengthening connections and collective action among U.S. pro-democracy movements and sectors. Maria is an award-winning author and organizer whose work has focused on the role of nonviolent movements advancing human rights, democracy, and peace. She co-wrote with Erica Chenoweth, Why Civil Resistance Work, The Strategic Logic of Nonviolent Conflict, which received the American Political Science Association's award for Best Book Published in a Political Science in 2012, and the Garmeyer Award for Ideas Improving World Order. Before joining the Horizons Project, Stefan founded and directed the program on nonviolent action at the U.S. Institute of Peace, overseeing applied research, a global training program, and work with policymakers to support activists, peace builders, and social movements in their struggles to advance more just, peaceful, and democratic societies around the world. Stefan received her BA in Political Science from Boston College and her MA and PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. She received a Harry S. Truman National Scholarship for Public Service and was a Fulbright Scholar to Germany. Stefan is a lifetime member of the Council on Foreign Relations, an advisor to the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, a trainer with the Freedom Trainers, and an active member of Showing Up for Racial Justice, SURJ. Maria is a proud Vermonter who resides in New York City. So from one New Englander to another, I welcome you to this virtual stage, this virtual forum, Dr. Maria Steffens.
Okay, thank you, Reverend Ray. That was a long introduction. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be with you all today, and especially to be speaking following, following the faith leaders who have been doing God's work in cities and communities across this country. And we've already heard that these are incredibly dark times in this country. And at the same time, we are experiencing such remarkably courageous, loving ways that people are showing up for their neighbors, for their communities, how they are resisting various forms of tyranny and fascism in this moment. And it's just deeply inspiring to be in space with you all, clergy and members of the faith community. So I was asked to talk a little bit about our kind of authoritarian context, and then more importantly, to talk about, strategies that groups in this country and around the world have used to resist authoritarianism while building the kind of society and world that we need. So Matthew, you can start. You can skip to the second slide. So just to put things in context in the US, so we are definitely in the period of authoritarian consolidation right now in the US, which is a period, where autocrats and an autocratic regime's attempts to consolidate power, kind of eliminate constraints, checks and balances, and to be able to remain in power indefinitely. And, we have a long history of authoritarianism in this country, a long history of racial authoritarianism that has been grounded in racism, white supremacy, misogyny. We know that, we've had sub-national authoritarian regimes in the South, with Jim Crow being a prime example of that. So we have a deep and long history of this type of regime in this country. And, it's important to put into context that
what we're experiencing in the United States is also happening globally. So there is a 2-decade rise of authoritarianism all around the world, touching all regions of the world, with autocrats actively collaborating and learning from each other. When scholars of democracy and authoritarianism look at the US, they've concluded that the rate of backsliding, the rate of authoritarian resurgence is happening much more quickly compared to analogous countries where you've had elected leaders who have gone on to eviscerate the norms and institutions of democracy. So places like Hungary and Turkey. So, scholars, and we can have a long conversation about, is it authoritarianism? Is it fascism? Is it both? There are elements of both that are happening now in the U.S. Steve Levitsky and Dan Ziblatt, who are scholars of democracy, have concluded we've already tipped into competitive authoritarianism, where you still have elections, but the incumbent regime is systematically attempting to tilt the playing field in favor of the incumbency, to remove constraints on power, to suppress opposition and dissent. And they say, we've tipped into authoritarianism when the costs of dissent, the cost of opposition is high. And we've definitely reached that period. So we're experiencing, what autocrats around the world try to do to divide people, to divide and rule, to impose costs and harms in order to consolidate their power. So the next slide. And so, it used to be like a few months ago that we would have to talk about, well, have folks seen some of these examples of the authoritarian playbook? So these tactics that autocrats all around the world use. Now, I think we're experiencing, many of these in our daily lives, and people across the country are experiencing what it looks like when the federal government uses direct investigations against critics, whether it's Letitia James or others. They give license to law breaking. They offer, they allow the January 6th insurrectionists to get off. They use regulatory retaliation. So they go after law firms, universities. The FCC pressures media outlets to comply. Of course, we've seen a huge wealth shift, corruption, and shifting of wealth and resources to a very tiny percentage of the population, to the oligarchs, to the billionaires. Autocrats deploy the military domestically, and we've seen that all across the country, in cities in LA and DC and Memphis, Chicago, all places where we've seen the military, active and National Guard deployed. And of course, we've experienced viscerally the federal law enforcement overreach with, ICE, Border Patrol agents, and others, engaged in daily acts of terrorism in our communities. And of course, the autocrat won't leave. We have an experience of that on January 6th, where the president attempted to remain in power when he was voted out. And we've already, seen all of the indications that the president is going to attempt to manipulate the will of the people and remain in power. And of course, we've seen judicial branch capture as well, Supreme Court largely siding with the administration. So these are kind of part and parcel of the authoritarian playbook. And then the next slide, we know as well that religious nationalism, and particularly white Christian nationalism, is the fuel underpinning authoritarianism in this country. This framework that conflates American identity with a very exclusive form of religious identity is providing enablement for authoritarianism. And this terrible mixture of white supremacy, nativism, patriarchy, and authoritarianism that ultimately is about seeking to concentrate power in a select group. So that's the ideological, and we've seen the commercials, how the ICE recruitment ads use scripture and texts and symbols and slogans to attempt to, win support and consolidate power. The next slide. So, the troubling news is that often around the world, when you start to see attacks on democracy and when backsliding occurs, it often leads to a breakdown into full authoritarian rule. And that's happened in a number of cases. But we also know, looking at cases over the past 3 decades, that over half of the countries where you've seen democratic breakdown have ended up resulting in stronger democracies. And that happened happen because people organized, they mobilized, they fought back. And what was key was people power. So next slide. So what are we talking about here with people power or nonviolent resistance, civil resistance? You can offer click the slide for the definition. It's about how ordinary people from different walks of life, parts of society, wage struggle for political, economic, social goals without the threat or use of violence. It involves protests, strikes, sit-ins, boycotts, civil disobedience, constructive programs, hundreds of tactics that people use to block harm and to resist, oppression and to build alternatives. Next slide. And so, this really stunning statistic, which is that, when you have democratic backsliding, the probability of stopping it and of stopping authoritarian consolidation is about 7.5% without a civil resistance movement. With the presence of a civil resistance movement, the chances of stopping backsliding and stopping authoritarian consolidation rises to almost 52%. So building that strong people power movement is really, really key. And thankfully, we're seeing all of that taking place across the country. Next slide. So, and I've been deeply inspired in my work and study and work with movements around the world in all of the examples of where unarmed civilian population have resisted the worst forms of tyranny, authoritarianism, fascism, and they have prevailed. And I was very inspired, in my studies early on by a documentary film, A Force More Powerful, which tells the story of 6 nonviolent struggles that changed the course of history. So everything from the Gandhi-led Indian independence movement to the Danish resistance to the Nazis, to the US civil rights movement, to the Polish solidarity movement that challenged communist dictatorship, to the movement in Chile that ousted Augusto Pinochet, to the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. And you'll see some of these images, the top left, the powerful movement in Chile that brought workers and students and miners and faith leaders together to collectively say no to Augusto Pinochet's dictatorship and successfully removed him from power. The bottom left, one of the most powerful civil resistance campaigns in the history of the world, the Montgomery bus boycott, which was so key to desegregating the South and ending, dismantling Jim Crow. The top right, the powerful role of clergy, faith communities, divestment, boycott, strikes in pushing back against the apartheid regime in South Africa and paving the way to a democratic transition. And just last year in South Korea, when the president imposed martial law, we saw the population rise up en masse to push back against martial law. Confederation of Trade Unions declared a national strike. Young people with K-pop sticks, clergy, others pushed back until they not only ended martial law, they impeached the president and built the path towards a reparative democracy. Next slide. So, there is fortunately this long history of people resisting authoritarianism and prevailing. And in my study with Erica Chenoweth of hundreds of campaigns around the world that have challenged autocracy, we found that the most successful campaigns were those that attracted and sustained mass diverse participation. So they brought people together from all different sectors and walks of life, political ideologies into broad fronts that were able to challenge various forms of repression. And, my colleague Erica found that no regime has remained in power when 3.5% has engaged in active protest. So that's, it doesn't mean we need everyone, not at all, but we need a broad enough front that brings a lot of people together across difference. We found that successful campaigns were those that engaged in, used lots of different tactics. So everything from vigils and protests and marches to acts of non-cooperation like boycotts, strikes, walkouts, civil disobedience, to the critically important building of alternatives. So using different tactics is really, really key, because when large numbers of people from different parts of society engage in active mobilization and active defiance, it is incredibly difficult for any regime to resist and to put down. So that participation and different tactics are really key. And then the ability to shift loyalties and key pillars, these organizations and institutions that uphold authoritarian regimes. So bringing about shifts in businesses and the faith community, in professional associations, in security forces, really key to the success of pro-democracy movements. And then autocrats use repression to divide people, to make them fearful, to try to get them to keep their heads down. So we know that movements that prepare, they organize, they train, they provide mutual aid. These have been key to not only remaining resilient, but being able to make repression backfire so that perpetrators of violence, regimes who engage in state violence, pay a price politically, socially, economically. So next slide. So we know, autocrats don't operate alone. All of their power comes from organizations and institutions in society that provide key forms of social, political, economic, spiritual support that they need to maintain power. So we can think of authoritarianism as a system that's held up by these institutions. So without the active support of bureaucrats, of police and military, of unions, of businesses, of faith organizations and institutions, they have no power. They can't wield control. And of course, pillars are not monolithic. They're made up of people with different interests, loyalties, positions. And so a lot of when we're talking about strategies and tactics, how can we engage people within these pillars to pull them to the side of pro-democracy movements and away from supporting or enabling autocracy? Next slide. And of course, within the faith community and within the religious pillar, faith organizations and networks have huge influence over other pillars. They have inroads and relationships with unions, with small businesses and business associations, with members of the police and military, with civil service. So thinking about what is the role of faith communities in this moment, and we're already seeing the active engagement of religious organizations and leaders in engaging and trying to move these pillars to stop enabling autocracy and to support freedom and democracy. Next slide. So just to put a finer point on it, Gene Sharp, who's one of the scholars in the field of nonviolent resistance, just in this quote makes clear how much power we have in this moment. And he wrote that, by themselves, rulers can't collect taxes, enforce repressive laws and regulations, keep trains running on time, prepare national budgets, direct traffic, manage ports, print money, repair roads, keep markets supplied with food, make steel, build rockets, train police and army, issue postage stamps, or even milk a cow. People provide these services to the ruler through a variety of organizations and institutions. If people would stop providing these skills, the ruler could not rule. So that just shows how much power we have. And when we engage in active defiance and non-compliance, we can bring about significant change. Next slide. So just to quickly, we already heard so many of these different tactics of people power through the faith leaders who have already spoken, all the symbolic actions that have been used, the protests, the marches, the vigils, the daily banging of pots and pans in DC and other places, the hanging of signs. We've heard examples on this call of non-cooperation, which is about actively disrupting an unjust system, refusing to cooperate with it, making it hard for the system to maintain the status quo. So we've heard in Minneapolis about the targeting of hotels that were housing ICE agents. We've seen the singing outside of hotels, calling on ICE agents to withdraw, to stop engaging in acts of repression. We've heard about consumer boycotts targeting Target, Hilton, Home Depot, enablers of autocracy. We've heard about worker strikes and walkouts, and of course the day-long January 23rd day-long strike in Minneapolis. Don't go to work, don't go to school, don't engage in economic activity. Incredibly powerful. We've heard about jury nullification. So grand juries who refuse to grant indictments, to support indictments of people who are brought, who are pulled into the court system. The sandwich guy, the subway guy in DC was exonerated by a grand jury who refused to indict. Most recently, those Democratic politicians who called on members of the military to serve the Constitution, not obey illegal orders. They as well, the grand jury refused to indict them. So hugely powerful tactic. And of course, the building of alternatives, the constructive program, the mutual aid, the neighborhood watches, the days of joy and resistance, all critically important tactics, and they need each other and they work with each other. Next slide. And we can think of, we heard so clearly that resistance in this moment is not enough. Of course, we need to organize to protect our communities, to block harm, to block those who are seeking to terrorize our neighbors, our communities, that are seeking to undermine democratic institutions. So we do need to engage in that blocking, but we also need to bridge. We need to be able to build bridges across divides, bring people together across difference, to be able to engage in broad front movement activity in this moment. So the bridging so key. And the building, what are we building towards? What is that positive vision of the future that we can attract support and hope of people as we continue to resist in this moment. So next slide. And just, we already heard all of these examples, so I don't need to spend so much time in talking about the superpowers that faith leaders and communities can take. But just to say all of the moral protest and persuasion that we have observed, and faith leaders and communities leaning into their identities as they show up for vigils and protests and demonstrations. I think something like 4 million of the participants in the last No Kings demonstration were people of faith, which is amazing. Of course, the organizing, the training, the being able to mobilize organized communities, providing spaces for de-escalation, direct action trainings, providing spaces for mutual aid, delivering food, all of these incredible things we're hearing about across the country, providing resources, sanctuary to mitigate repression, showing up in clerical garb to mitigate and deter repression, the use of symbols, of rituals, of marches, to offer hope that we can bend the arc, that the arc of the universe bends in the direction of justice. Faith leaders have such a powerful role to play in reminding us of that hope. The bridging, and of course the non-cooperation, the stubbornly saying no and refusing to go along with the oppression, refusing to support businesses and organizations, entities that are enabling authoritarianism in this moment, all key. Next and last slide. So I'll just say, there are so many different roles for everyone in this moment, and there really is a place for everyone. And we can think about all the key activities now that are needed to protect people, to reduce harm. We can think about all the key activities to defend civic institutions, whether they're local councils and media outlets or, national election institutions to ensure free and fair elections, critical work, disrupting and disobeying. So actively not complying and disrupting those actors that are enabling the acts of repression that we're experiencing and that particularly marginalized communities are experiencing across this country. And of course, the building of alternatives, the parallel institutions, the party platforms, the culture building, all key. So I will end it with there, and just to say that faith leaders and communities have a critical role and are playing a critical role in all of these. And it gives me so much hope and inspiration just to see the level of courageous, loving, tenacious activity that faith communities are leading all across this country.
Thank you so much. That was some powerful information. Thank you for sharing that with us. It is our hope that you all will take that information with you and use it as you continue to advocate. Our faith teaches us, really mandates us to do this. And the more information, the more knowledge we have, the more powerful we are, the more effective we are in this work. So thank you so much again. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is the president of Sojourners. I had the pleasure of working directly and very closely with our next speaker as a staff person at Sojourners. So it is really an honor for me to introduce my former colleague and still a colleague in a different capacity, Reverend Adam Russell Taylor. Reverend Adam Russell Taylor is the president of Sojourners and the author of A More Perfect Union, a new vision for building the beloved community. Reverend Taylor previously led the Faith Initiative at the World Bank Group and served as the vice president in charge of advocacy at World Vision US and the senior political director at Sojourners. He has also served as the executive director of Global Justice, an organization that educates and mobilizes students around global human rights and economic justice. He was selected for the 2009 and 2010 class of White House Fellows and served in the White House Office of Cabinet Affairs and Public Engagement. Reverend Taylor is a graduate of Emory University, the Harvard University Kennedy School of Government, and the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology. Reverend Taylor is the chair of the Independent Sector Board and is a member of the inaugural class of the Aspen Institute's Civil Society Fellowship. Reverend Taylor is ordained in the American Baptist Church and the Progressive National Baptist Convention and serves in ministry at the Alfred Street Baptist Church in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you would like to follow him, you can follow him on Blue Sky at Reverend Adam Taylor. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Reverend Taylor.
Thank you, Reverend Ajuas. Just grateful for your kind introduction. Thankful to the National Council of Churches for bringing together this conversation on such a critical time and a critical moment. And thank you. It's always an honor to be able to follow Maria. I've been able to learn so much from her. And in some ways, hopefully in a lot of ways, actually, my presentation is going to build on and maybe expound on some of the things that she just shared. I just want to thank all of the faith leaders and other the panelists before me that shared such wisdom and so many examples of faithful courage. And it actually makes my job easier because in many ways they've already provided a really powerful snapshot of what we are seeing all across the country, from Washington, D.C. to Maine to Chicago, and of course, Minneapolis. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little bit about what I think the faith factor is in this moment. And while we have seen a surge of cruelty, a surge of intolerance and hatred, a surge of brutality and of excessive force, the good news is that we are seeing in this moment a counter surge of courage, of nonviolent resistance, and of mutual aid, and of so much more. And so I want to kind of build on some of the things that I've been seeing and I've been able to be a part of. And I really do believe that we could be approaching a kind of tipping point in this dangerous slide toward authoritarianism. And I want to echo Maria's term that we are really arguably have crossed the threshold of what many experts call competitive authoritarianism. Earlier today, I had a chance to join with Minnesota faith leaders and others from the labor community and beyond that were gathered at the Capitol, advocating to Congress in this moment, particularly the Senate, where a hearing was taking place this morning, to really challenge this administration, particularly in a moment when Congress is at a stalemate around appropriating additional funds for not only the Department of Homeland Security, but even ICE. And as we heard earlier, it is egregious that ICE already receives such an incredible increase in funding through the big bill. And DHS as a whole receives so much funding that it is now has more money than most militaries do in the world. Fortunately, there has been evidence of some greater courage in the Senate, where many Democrats are holding a line that they are not willing to appropriate another penny for ICE in particular until there is significant reform, until there is significant accountability and significant guardrails put in place that would ensure real investigations of those who have been the victims of ICE violence, until there are true guardrails that can, help, really mitigate so much of what we are seeing and prevent it from being spread to other cities. I was also in Minneapolis for the Ice Out of Minnesota March and Rally. I have to admit, I have never been that cold in my life. And that was a small price to pay compared to the sacrifice that so many Minnesotans are exercising every day by standing up for their constitutional rights and by standing up for the basic inherent human dignity that each and every person possess. But when we think about our faith traditions, we know that at our best, and I'm going to speak, from my own faith tradition from the Christian context, but I think this is true across faith traditions. Our faith traditions equip and call us to engage in peace building work. It is extremely offensive that the Department of Homeland Security has been using taxpayer dollars to create these slick recruitment videos in order to recruit ICE agents. The most recent one literally essentially lifts out of context and I would argue abuses the words of Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount when he said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." And so this social media ad literally is making the argument that ICE are modern day peacemakers. That is about as opposite to reality as we can find. And when I think about the Bible in particular, it really is a handbook for resistance. As Maria described so brilliantly, we are seeing tactics from the authoritarian playbook being exercised by this administration. And in response, we have to create a countervailing playbook that is rooted in the best of our faith traditions. Maria kind of went pretty quickly over a number of what she refers to as faith community superpowers. And I'm a huge fan of Marvel Comics, and so that kind of reference to superpowers resonates a great deal with me. And I just want to mention a few of them again, particularly in the context of what we are seeing faith communities do in this moment. One of those superpowers is to engage in moral protest and persuasion. And what we have been seeing at detention centers with faith leaders praying, disarming ICE and what ICE is doing with the power of their prayers and their songs. In many ways, cell phones and whistles have become the new weapons of nonviolent resistance. Cell phones, by capturing the truth of what's happening, literally the cell phone that was in Alex Pretty's hand before he was ultimately murdered by ICE agents. Whistles that are literally a tool that enable neighbors to look out for and protect their neighbors, to alert their neighbors when ICE has a presence in their neighborhood and is conducting raids. We know that the faith community has been engaged in a great deal of organizing and training. One example of that is a number of organizations, including Sojourners. I should mention from the outset, I have the privilege of leading Sojourners, as you heard, and we are an ecumenical Christian organization that has a publication arm and a mobilizing arm, an advocacy arm. And we have partnered with Interfaith Alliance, with a range of faith-based organizations to try to organize a series of trainings around the country that really build on a lot of what Maria just shared, but enabling us to go even deeper and teaching the principles and tenets of nonviolent social resistance and change. And so we have an initial training, kind of a pilot training that we have planned in just a few weeks in Phoenix, Arizona. And our goal is to be able to kind of replicate these trainings all around the country so that we can train up a whole kind of movement of faith leaders that will be prepared or better prepared and equipped when we see future surges of ICE in their community. We know that faith communities have been engaged in an incredible amount of mutual aid. We certainly are seeing this in Minneapolis and St. Paul right now. I was blown away during the ICE out of Minnesota March and Day of Action and of Solidarity to literally see an entire two cities shut down. I couldn't find a single restaurant that was open. Schools were shut down in solidarity with the protests demanding that ICE get out of Minnesota. Leveraging symbolic and spiritual power, including through the use of our rituals. We're about to enter into the season of Lent, and it is a season of repentance. It is a season of penitence. It is a season of going deeper in our relationship with God as we remember Jesus' 40 days wandering the wilderness before he engaged in his own more public ministry. Well, I think there are many faith leaders, not just in the Christian tradition, are really thinking about how we can harness the holy holidays of Ramadan and Eid and of Passover in the Jewish tradition, and ultimately of Resurrection Sunday and Good Friday, in order to inspire people of faith to really stand up and to show out and to engage in greater acts of courage. We know that bridge building is really critical, and it's extremely important that we're engaging many of the people that are even in our own social network in brave conversations to try to help get them out of their echo chambers and to try to provide, courageous influence in this moment. And then finally, this is one that I want to there's kind of two that I want to add to the list that I want to emphasize a little bit more. One is the importance of noncompliance, and in particular, the power of boycotts. Again, Maria kind of mentioned this briefly. We can remember, in particularly this context of the civil rights movement, the degree to which the Montgomery bus boycott, which lasted over 380 days, was kind of, arguably the first seminal victory that the movement was able to achieve because of mass mobilization and noncompliance. And I would argue the pillar that we have seen the least amount of courage from, or put another way, the pillar that is capitulated the most with the kind of authoritarian slide that we are seeing in our nation, has been big business. It's been corporate America. We have seen greater acts of courage and resistance from a lot of small businesses, and Minneapolis is a great example of that. But by and large, with a few exceptions, most major corporations have been either aiding and abetting this administration or have remained silent, even in the midst of the use of many of the pages of the authoritarian playbook. And so I think this is a moment where we need to think more strategically about how we can harness our economic power, our consumer power, in order to call many of these corporations to accountability and call them to either stop being directly supportive of this administration and to start speaking out. A couple of key examples include AT&T, that has a $200 million contract with the administration. Hilton, that is providing hotels, as contract with the administration to provide hotels for ICE agents. There's an ongoing protest and boycott of Target that Reverend Jamal Bryant and others have been spearheading because of their capitulation around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, again, we can certainly talk about this more in the Q&A, but I think there's a lot more that needs to be done there. The last thing I want to kind of emphasize is just the power and importance of faith communities in helping to challenge the spiritual lies that are undergirding this current authoritarian consolidation that we're seeing, and to be able to replace that with more hopeful narratives, with more narratives that are rooted in a commitment to courage, to compassion, and to justice. We know that so often faith leaders are constantly casting vision through their sermons and their teachings that are kind of replacing the lies that we are seeing that are harming people with the spiritual truths that we know can ultimately help liberate us. And so, in the midst of so many of the lies that we've seen purported by this administration to justify the surge of ICE and the siege upon our cities, we have to provide spiritual truths. And we know that is rooted in the rich prophetic tradition of the prophets, who so often name the spiritual lies that injustice and oppression feeds upon, and instead interrupted that with spiritual truths. The spiritual truth, for example, that we are all made in the image and likeness of God, that no one is expendable or less than. The spiritual truth that that so much of what is happening is actually making our communities less safe, not more safe. And that's certainly been a strong message by the current police chief of Minneapolis. The spiritual truth that the real peacemakers are the ones that are playing these roles as bystanders within their communities, that are using whistles to alert their neighbors to the harm and danger that ISIS poses to their streets and their communities. Finally, I just want to share an example of how many Christians are coming together to try to challenge harmful narratives and challenge the heresy of white Christian nationalism that is undergirding this authoritarian consolidation, and instead replace it with a call to live out our faith in a more courageous way. On Ash Wednesday, hundreds of national Christian leaders from across the evangelical and Catholic and mainline and Black church and Latino church traditions are going to be co-launching a statement that is really a call to courage, called a call to Christians in a crisis of faith and democracy. And I just want to preview a tiny bit of this statement. The beginning reads, "There are moments that call for repentance and resistance, courage and conviction, faith and fortitude. This is one of those moments. The question is, what will we do now?" And then it goes on to say, "We call on all Christians to join us in greater acts of courage to resist the injustices and anti-democratic dangers sweeping across the nation. In moments like this, silence is not neutrality. It is an active choice to permit harm." Reverend Leslie said at the beginning of this program that she quoted the prophet Isaiah, who said, "Woe to you that says that, evil good, that calls evil good and good evil." Well, I want to remind us of the Apostle Paul, who in Romans 12:21 calls us to not be overcome by evil, but to overcome evil with good. And in the next chapter, the Apostle Paul writes that government authorities are called by God to be God's servant of good, to restrain evil and to advance the common good. Well, beloved, we have heard how ICE's aggressive tactics are doing the exact opposite. They are leading to greater unrest and the tragic potential for even greater violence. And now we must meet ICE's surge of cruelty with our own surge of courage and non-violent resistance. Resistance that will require greater levels of courage and greater levels of sacrifice. And I'm just grateful that we've already heard so many examples of courage in this program. And I believe that by tapping into these superpowers, by harnessing them, not only will we be able to get ICE out of our communities and our cities, but we will be able to reverse this broader and greater slide into authoritarianism and replace it with our call to the beloved community, our call to help get our nation back up that journey of becoming a truly just and inclusive multiracial democracy.
Thank you, Adam. That was amazing. This whole panel has been giving me life and encouragement. I want to, before we go to some questions and answers, I want to turn it over to the President and General Secretary of the National Council of Churches. I call her the Bishop, T-H-E Bishop, Vashti Murphy McKenzie. Bishop McKenzie.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Leslie. And thank you to all of the panelists who have come, especially those who are in the trenches, on the field, on the ground, who shared what was happening. And thank you, Dr. Maria, and also Adam, and everyone on the line for sharing what is important in this moment. We stand in a moment when evil struts in daylight, when law is bent to power, when speech and protest are increasingly constrained rather than protected, and when people, especially our neighbors, people of color, immigrants, the poor, the vulnerable, are bearing the weight of structural injustice and violence with alarming frequency. So, people of faith must have to ask ourselves, the church must ask itself, are we a voice or an echo? Are we just repeating yesterday's courage without taking today's risk? Or are we a voice naming injustice at the cost to comfort and access and approval? In Minnesota, the killing of Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother of three shot by federal immigration agents, has ignited ongoing demonstrations and calls for accountability. Yes, in St. Paul, civil rights attorney Nikema Levy Armstrong and other activists were arrested for entering a church service to protest the pastor's dual role with ICE. dual democracy, raising questions about where sanctuary ends and protest begins, and whether civil rights is really being criminalized. Faith leaders, clergy, congregants, especially in Minnesota and other places, have been arrested at airport protests in solidarity with their neighbors. Evidence that the church too often crosses from comfort into crisis. Across Maine, hundreds have taken to Monument Square to oppose aggressive federal immigration operations. And in Chicago, in greater Chicago, nearly 24 were detained when faith leaders protested outside a federal immigration facility. These are not isolated incidents. It is a national convocation of conscience. And so the question before us, are we merely against injustice, but are we for justice in praxis, in policy, and in presence? And so we must confront the paradox of dual systems that speak loudly about freedom while constraining freedoms of some. Systems that arm themselves with symbols of liberty while denying due process to some. Dignity and safety to the defenseless, some. Systems that punish protests more harshly than the policy harms that produce it. And so you have heard from our panelists all across this webinar, and I'm sure you have questions and also testimonies about moments of courage where you live. But here at the National Council of Churches, our theme this year is We Will Not Be Silent. All year long, we will not be silent about what is happening to our neighbors. We would not be silent about what's happening to our country. We would not be silent what is happening to the most vulnerable, to children who go to bed hungry every night, to teachers who are weary, to families who are behind closed doors afraid to come out. We will not be silent, and we invite you to join us. This February for us is an impact month. We began here with this webinar talking about a fragile democracy, faith in a fragile democracy. And we will continue. We will not be silent about the role that the Word of God plays in our lives, where we launch our commemorative Bible later this month, and we invite you to join us. Wow. And there's even more. When we come to Ash Wednesday, we will once again be out in the field and join our partners and collaborators in sharing the imposition of ashes of those who want them. But we want to be a visible presence, that we will not be silent. For Lent calls us to repent, to take a look, to examine ourselves for 40 days. So let's do that. And we invite you to join us. And then we will begin also on Ash Wednesday our Deliver Us from Evil social media campaign. It is a nationwide Lenten prayer campaign that begins on February the 18th. And this bold call to collective prayer is an extension of our ongoing We Will Not Be Silent movement, which has mobilized congregations and communities to raise their prophetic voice for justice, compassion, and the protection of the vulnerable. So we're asking you, that's right, we're asking you and congregations and organizations and neighborhood and civic groups and councils all across the country to join in a unified act of faith, to pray daily at 12 noon wherever you are. And on Ash Wednesday, dress in black for the day as a visible witness, create a sign or obtain a sign bearing the words, Deliver us from evil, Matthew 6 and 13. Take a photo of it and share it on your social media platforms, wherever they are. And then when your neighbor does it and your friend does it, then you pass that on. Thousands across the country are going to declare with one voice, Deliver us from evil. Gather with your prayer partners and prayer groups and your congregation. And we have an official campaign t-shirt, which we'll share in a minute. And above all, pray believing that the God who hears is the God who will answer. Deliver us from evil takes its name directly from the prayer Jesus taught, recognizing that the challenges facing communities today demand more than strategy alone.
They demand spiritual intervention. The campaign offers Lenten hope for the weary and healing for the wounded and help for the most vulnerable among us. Don't you know, when Jesus taught us to pray, he included 4 words: deliver us from evil. And the prayer reminds us that we cannot save ourselves. We do not simply need better strategies. We need deliverance too. We need protection when evil threatens us. We need preservation when it pressures us. We need guidance when it disguises itself as an opportunity. We need the Lord to shield us from it and sometimes carry us through it. And notice what the Lord said. He didn't just say, deliver me from evil. He said, deliver us. And so this is a communal campaign of us coming together. Yeah. And he prayed, deliver us from evil. And so, yes, we're going to pray for the teachers who are weary and the children who go to bed hungry and the pastors under pressure and families facing loss and communities under threat. And we will pray for one another because none of us is safe all by ourselves. And after we pray, we're going to get up off our knees and we're going to go to work. Yeah, we're going to put feet to our prayer. Deliver Us from Evil builds on the foundation laid by our We Will Not Be Silent campaign. Remember, this is an ecumenical community to use our collective voice as an instrument for justice and moral witness in the public square. Deliver Us from Evil helps us to speak boldly against injustice, anchors that prophetic courage in the oldest discipline the church has ever known, prayer, and put feet to those prayers. And we believe prayer is not a ritual to be performed, but a holy opportunity for us in this Lenten season. As scripture teaches, let us therefore approach the throne of grace with boldness so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. That's in Hebrews. You go look it up for yourself. So beginning on Ash Wednesday, we invite you to join us. Continue through the Lenten season. We invite every person, every congregation to take the following actions. Remember, join us in prayer every day at 12 noon, praying the 4-word prayer, deliver us from evil. Wear black on the day as a public declaration of solidarity and spiritual seriousness. Make or obtain a sign with the words, deliver us from evil. Take a selfie and post it on your social media platform. Purchase or wear the official campaign t-shirt, Deliver Us from Evil, as a conversation starter and visible witness. You see it right there on the screen. Deliver us from evil. Pray with others. Gather with your prayer partners. Come on, we're prayer warriors. Yes, we are. We're not helpless. God did not leave us by ourselves with a t-shirt and flip-flops. God has given us spiritual disciplines that have power beyond our individual selves. We just need to engage in it. And so come, we invite you to join us. Organize your church prayer groups. Simply pray in your prayer closet. Go into your prayer war room and believe that God will hear and answer our prayer. Simple. 4 words. You can do it. Deliver us from evil. Thank you, Dr. Leslie.
Amen. Thank you, Bishop. That was amazing. And this has just been such a great time of sharing. We've heard from local and state councils of churches. We've heard from communities across the country, and we've heard national efforts as well. And so I wanted to just say thank you to all the panelists. I want us to take a breath, and I have just a couple of questions that I'm hoping if you all could turn your cameras on and just share in a time of, I don't know if anyone has any burning thoughts that they, just from having heard everything. I did want to just throw out one question about, well, a couple of questions. One is, for those communities that at this point have not seen a surge, but one may be coming. I know, Reverend Jane, you talked about you all were preparing before the surge, for the surge. And I'm just wondering any thoughts that you all have about what a community that thinks, well, maybe it won't happen to us, and that it could happen to them. What should people be thinking about in terms of how to be prepared and preparing for what's coming?
I can go first if that's all right.
Sure.
I think the most important thing right now is establishing relationships, especially, I mean, and the church is such a beautiful place to do that. So developing relationships with Hispanic and Latino churches, developing lines of trust and communication so that they know who to turn to and we know who to turn to, and we can rely on each other to not be prescriptive, but see what can really be helpful. And the more work we can do in that relationship and community building before the crisis hits, the stronger we'll be in the crisis together and be able to work together. So I think that's absolutely step one.
I echo that. That was our experience for sure. And uh, going beyond the walls of the faith community to build those trusting relationships with immigrant-led and immigrant-serving organizations in your area. There's a lot of reason for mistrust. We've earned it, and we need to re-earn their trust again. And to do it before the crisis hits, it will serve you well. I'm so grateful to two faith leaders in our state in particular who understood how important it was right after the election to start doing that work so that we were ready to try to do it once they come. That's not when you want to be doing this work. And I'm sure Elder Kelly has experienced that as well. They've been doing that work as well. But yeah, relationships and across faith traditions within the church, beyond the church, and with secular organizations that are immigrant-led and immigrant-serving.
And I would echo that. And just to add to it that we were able to develop relationships, particularly post George Floyd, which has been now almost 6 years ago. We understood relationships with law enforcement, local law enforcement, local elected officials, and were critically important. Having them see us as partners in the work of community building was critical. And so it also helped us withstand this current surge, because while we had external forces coming in, we had those trusting relationships with the police chiefs, with the mayors, and we were able to stand together and trust one another that we were going to do what was right for the citizens and residents of these communities. So definitely those relationships are important as well.
I would add to all that has been said that within immigrant communities, it is important for us to start having hard conversations around what could happen if to our families if detention were to be the case, knowing ahead of time a little bit of a plan of who could we entrust our resources, our people to, and beginning to think through those. In different states, there are different legislations as to how you can entrust power for your children and what you want to do with your children. And so beginning to have those conversations, and they're very sensitive. Churches have been really critical in having some of those pastors in making broad calls for folks to have an open invitation to disclose their status and to have the ability to think through that one-on-one. So
Thank you. That's all really important. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Dr. Maria.
No, I was just gonna, so many brilliant ideas about like broad front organizing and forming alliances and relationships with other sectors. And I would just also say, like, don't forget about the veterans community and military families community. Don't forget about small businesses. Don't forget about the unions, so critically important. So these key sectors and forming strong ties and alliances across these, different groups is so critically important. And then just to underscore something that Adam had said as well in his remarks, just the importance of, thinking, going beyond the protest and the vigils to the acts of noncompliance and targeting the corporate enablers. So that's one thing across the country that we can be thinking about is locally, what are the corporations, AT&T, Hilton, Home Depot, Target, that are actively enabling authoritarianism, and how do we really build the muscle to be able to apply economic pressure on these corporate enablers. And then there are groups like Mayday Strong, which is organizing worker strikes and building the muscle for workers collective action with communities. So how can we support those types of labor plus faith plus other groups? So critically important. And just the other thing that comes to mind in this moment is I'm thinking about like how integral Stephen Miller is to all of these operations right now. Certainly to DHS, to ICE, giving orders to the Pentagon. He's at the center of all of it. And maybe it's time collectively to call for Stephen Miller to get out. That just might be a thought as well.
I think applaud all the suggestions that have been, but I want to piggyback on Maria to remind us that everybody can do something. You may not be the one to be on the picket line or outside in the street and protest. You may not be at the airport. You may not be on the front line. You may not be going through your neighborhood and saying ICE is over here, ICE is over there. But there's something that everybody can do. And it's a part of having those strong conversation with your neighbors to be able to have a plan. If something happens, they know that they can count on their neighbors. So, there's some people that we've heard from in Minnesota who, blow whistles and blow horns when imminent danger comes into their neighborhood. Others purchase food and others help kids get to school and back home. Everybody can do something. So take a look around, talk to your neighbors. Pastors can share pulpits, exchange worship with various communities in your churches so that you can get to know each other and be able to relate to each other. But everybody can do something. Find that something that you can do and put it into action.
Yeah, that's really important and critical. We're not helpless or hopeless, and we can all do something. So, a question that I think many people may be wondering about, and I'm not sure who the best person to answer this is if we want to help, how do we um, have make sure that we're safe, or how do we protect one another? How have you all handled just ways of trying to make sure, to the extent possible? We know that the unexpected can happen so many times, and we have witnessed some of the most horrible things happen. But how have you all, in your strategizing and your community building and relationships, talked about how to keep people protected and safe, both the people who are targeted and the people who are trying to intervene when ICE or when something is happening with the surge?
I can talk about what we've done for the people who are trying to help. We use Signal for encrypted chats and what are essentially FaceTime or Zoom meetings, Proton for email and Google, what are otherwise called Google Drive documents. And for those who are front-facing, public-facing, asking your church or your organization, your employer to get you subscribed to Delete Me so that people find it harder to dox you, to find your children, to find your home address. Those are all things that we have, for over a year, been asking people to do, and it's been working for us here.
And we also need to remember that we don't have to say everything public. Some things we hold close and we share with each other one-on-one because it might just be safer in certain situations.
I think it's also critically important for us to make sure that people participate in training so that we're not just sending people out to work on the front lines with no training, with no real understanding of what could happen. And so we've been encouraging either that we've offered or that our sister and brother organizations have offered that everyone who thinks they might want to participate and be on the front lines to go out and get the training that they need, or to participate in ways that are maybe less front-facing, but nonetheless important.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Oh.
Oops, Adam.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Maria. I'll follow you.
Oh, no, it was just such a perfect setup, Elder Suzanne, about the importance of training. And just to say, organizations like Vision Change Win have been offering community safety and security trainings for a long time. A dozen different organizations have come together to provide training on how to make political violence and repression backfire, including by protecting communities. So, this is the HOPE training, harnessing our power to end political violence and repression. And folks can take a look online at endpoliticalviolence.org, which has materials, endpoliticalviolence.org, on how to protect communities and make political violence and repression backfire. But it's also such a powerful way to build community. In trainings, you learn each other, you build relationships, you strategize, you scenario plan, and it's just so key to strengthening our movements.
Mhm.
Just really quickly, just emphasize that I think one of the spiritual charisms that we can bring to this work is understanding that nonviolence is a strategy and a very effective one, and Maria's research has certainly proven that. But it is also an ethic. It's a way of life. It is ingrained into the DNA of our faith traditions. And I recently was actually at Davidson College a couple days ago and was giving some lectures about Gandhi's understanding of ahimsa and Dr. King's understanding of nonviolence. And the King Center has kind of six principles, and I won't read them all, but they emphasize how nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. It seeks to win friendship and understanding. It defeats injustice and not people. It holds that suffering can educate and transform and chooses love instead of hate. And so, as much as nonviolence is courageous and it's fierce and it's not passive, it also refuses to engage in rhetoric and tactics that demonize and villainize. And I think that's really important in the context of how we do this work. And so I'll just kind of name that as something that I think, certainly it's not limited to just people of faith, but our faith calls us to engage in nonviolent work with that particular emphasis.
One of the things we've seen in Chicago, especially at the Broadview protests, once we saw the brutality of state violence enacted on us by the government and by Illinois State Police, is we've started building infrastructure around our protests. So every protest has the National Lawyers Guild there to provide legal support and to be, legal observers. We have trained street medics who are at every event. We have a medical tent set up. We have jail support for those who are arrested so that they have a way to get home and contact. We get donations of gas masks, water. We found that water bottles with sports knobs on it are really effective to help rinse out eyes and tear gas. Do not use milk. We've heard that rumor going around several times of people trying to do that. Please do not rinse out your eyes with milk. And so, like, our mantra here has been, we keep us safe. And so we look out for each other. We've taught each other how to de-arrest, how to keep each other safe, and how to care for each other. And then one of the most important things that I don't hear talked about too much, and is one of the things I'm most proud about in the city, is there have been counseling groups and therapists who have been on hand and have weekly meetings and meet with people who are just absolutely traumatized by the state violence and the things that they've witnessed and seen here. And so really what we're trying to do is take a holistic approach to it. And that's like, I think that's been like one of the most important roles I've played in this whole thing, and that several clergy have, is we provide spiritual care on the ground with people in the moment to make sure that they're safe and to get people out of situations if they can, if they get separated from loved ones, getting them connected, and just really making sure we have a lay of the land to make sure we know where the medics are to get people where they need to go and just provide whatever physical and spiritual care we can in the moment. So I just want to emphasize building an infrastructure around the direct actions and the protests, and support afterwards is huge and extremely important.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And Reverend Jane, you put take airplane mode off your phone's control panel and purchase a Faraday bag to keep your phone in when doing public civil disobedience and protests. I've heard a lot about that and surveillance and how that happens. So thank you for for that as well. I wanted to ask just two more questions. I have many more, but just two more. But one, I think it was you, Elder Kelly, that talked about the trauma and the need for repair. And I'm just wondering from all of you, what does repair look like? How do you see that being lived out? And how can faith communities even now try to begin that process? What does that look like for us?
So I think here in Minnesota, when we talk about repair, and particularly the Minnesota Council of Churches, who has a long history of working with immigrants and refugees, um, we are talking about small things like participating. Upcoming is Ramadan. We have co-sponsored iftar meals with our Muslim community, where Christians are going to the mosques, breaking bread at the end of the fasting day, just to learn a little bit more about our neighbors. And so it is rebuilding connection, rebuilding trust in small ways that matter to people who have been traumatized. But with our children, we are saying, listen, we learned lessons from COVID. We understand that when our children go back into the classroom, they still have to get on buses where they saw their bus drivers being taken off and taken away. They are leaving their homes where they've been in their homes for 2 months now, unable to go outside and play. They've been at schools where teachers and staff have had to confront ICE agents on the outside, in their parking lots, on their playgrounds. So we need to make sure that as adults in this community, we are giving them the space they need, extra time and attention. We're perhaps moving some of the standardized tests to later in the year, getting them back into the rituals and routines that they care about, and not melding faith with the state, if you will, keeping that separate, but understanding that faith community can come in and walk alongside in ways that don't proselytize or anything else, but say, here are other caring adults that can be in your buildings, in your schools, having the students come back to faith communities. All of that is going to be critical if we are going to decrease the trauma that we've seen and that they've experienced over the last couple of months.
Anyone else? I want to give you a chance to respond if you, yes.
I think everybody in my circle is getting sick of me reminding them that we cannot lose our joy and that we cannot let this diminish our capacity to love. And it's so easy to give it into the existential dread of what's going on and become almost nihilistic about it. And I'm constantly reminding people, as a way of reminding myself, that there are times where we need to step back and catch our breath and remember what it is we're fighting for and why we're fighting for it. And part of that is holding on to joy and never letting this diminish our capacity to love, because that's how empire's going to win, is by crushing our joy and hope and our ability to love each other.
That was going to be my final question. What brings you joy? How do you stay encouraged? So that's a great transition to that.
I would say there's an irony in this, which for me is always a sign that God's fingerprints are all over whatever it is that's happening when it's ironic. And that is, several of the speakers today have talked about it's not enough to say what we're against. It's also important to say what's the kind of world we want to be about building. And the irony is that in our resistance, we are learning what that world looks like. Mutual aid, having courage, standing together, loving our neighbor, getting to know our neighbor, for God's sake, let alone loving them, singing together, feeding the hungry, visiting the people in prison and securing their release. That's all what that world looks like that we want to build together. And God is just twisting that attack that we're all under and saying, in your resistance to it, you will find what you need to build the world you want to see.
I'm just thinking about the singing resistance that is singing outside of hotels and in communities, and just bringing the power of music to bring us together, and to call out things that are wrong, while also bringing people together in joy and celebration and solidarity. So the power of music.
I know sometimes it can sound cliche, but I really believe this is true, that courage is contagious. And I really do think there is just a real surge of courage in Minneapolis, of course, but also in other places around the country. And, one of the things I was going to mention, I forgot to, but I won't go into a lot of depth about this just because of time. But I've increasingly been feeling like this could be, or we could be on the precipice of what many of us in religious terms describe as a kairos moment. So there's kind of chronos is time as we know it, and then there's kairos, which is a moment of pregnant possibility. It's God's time, and it's a time where a real awakening can happen, a reckoning can happen that leads to real transformation. And so, yes, we know there's a lot of incredible harm that is being carried out. And at the same time, it is helping, or it can lead to this sense of kairos that then can create incredible change. And so um, I'll just use one example that was really inspiring from Minneapolis. There's an organization that it's called March, and they work really closely with Isaiah as well. And they put out a call across the country for clergy to come and spend 2 days with them to bear witness to what was happening in Minneapolis and to be a part of the ICE out of Minnesota. And I had another commitment, so I was only able to make it on the second day. But they literally had to shut down the website that was receiving all of these inquiries and people registering in 2 days because 1,000 people, 1,000 clergy from around the country were signed up, and they could, their venue could only fit 700. So I really think that there is this thirst that we need to continue to harness and tap into. And to me, that's an incredible source of inspiration and hope.
Mhm.
I want to echo those moments of agency. I think it's so easy to be scrolling all day or to be, watching the news again, and that can be so, um, can bring you down so much. But I think in the moments of like joining and seeing how others are in that space, seeing the faith of others inspires us. And I think one thing that has been really helpful in the communities where I'm at is the reminder to be connected to the light within us. I think there is so much that is happening. And some of what we're doing is literally like feeling our heartbeats, and pausing and remembering like that we've been given this day as a gift and finding the peace that is within us. And so a lot of rhythms and small practices throughout the day that can connect us back to the divine, back to God, back to the spirit, that can help us in the day-to-day turmoil that is around us. So learning those small practices, small moments of joy, drinking that tea or whatever it is that brings you hope, looking out the window, and finding those little spaces and pockets where when everything looks very dark.
And I'll add to what Sandy said, just rest. Rest is so underrated and so important to be refreshed and be able to find that joy. It's hard to do that when you don't have rest. We know Jesus's example in his moments of resistance, he rested. He went away, he found his space and it was able to rest, and that helped him give him more fuel for his ministry. So I'll add that as well.
For me, it's been the people. I mean, the people I've met and have befriended and worked and fought alongside for are some of the most beautiful people I've ever met in the world that I would have never met under any other circumstance. I mean, I've been basically adopted by a group of anarchists in their 20s. They've adopted a middle-aged white Presbyterian minister. Where else is that going to happen, right? And you see all these people from all walks of lives coming together and working together because they believe in a vision of this country that is something better than what it is now. and to see their selflessness, their dedication, their care for each other. I mean, it really like, religious language is the language I speak. I mean, it really is a vision of the kingdom. And to see that being enacted and lived out in the most beautiful way I can imagine, even in the midst of like some of the most horrific and terrifying things I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, that's where I find the joy, and that's where I find the hope, and that's where I find the gospel really coming alive and being enacted. And so it's been a beautiful thing to watch, people carrying each other and lifting each other up and fighting for one another. And that's the vision of the country that I want to live in. And I think it's while we're seeing the irony is while we're seeing America at its absolute worst in many ways, we're also seeing this country stepping up and being its absolute best in many other ways, and we can't lose sight of that.
It's so well said, Reverend Worthington. I'm a huge fan of this book. If you all haven't, I don't know if you all are seeing it, Hannah Reichel's For Such a Time as This. And one of the quotable quotes of many is, "The horror is real, and it is not the only true thing."
That's a great quote. Thank you. Thank you all. I have been inspired and encouraged and hope-filled because of all of you in this panel. Thank you so much for your time, for your transparency, for all that you're doing. Know that we are praying for you all. I'm just going to shout out Sandy for a moment. I was having a very emotional moment yesterday, and she just really ministered to me. And I think it was so helpful, and it just speaks to this moment of how we have to have each other's back. And when one person is feeling a little weak, somebody else is feeling a little stronger, and we can all get through this together. So I'm so appreciative and grateful. I know that this is going to be a blessing to people who, as they watch it and as they learn and glean from you all. We thought Maria had to jump, but she mentioned music. A few of you mentioned music. And there is a song that has been written for this Black History Month that really kind of sums up a little bit a lot of what we've been talking about. So I thought we would go out on that song. It's called Just Like Selma. And Matt is going to cue it up. And the composer is Reverend Nolan Williams Jr. And he really is trying to meet the moment in song that we need that encouragement as well. So, but Bishop, I wanted to see if there's something that you wanted to say in closing before we close out with the song.
Just to thank all the panelists and you and our staff who pulls all these things together for us as we begin our Impact Month in February. Just remember that the God of Exodus is still breaking chains, and the Christ of Calvary is still delivering from sin, death, and hell. Don't forget to pray. Deliver us from evil. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. And with that, Matt, if you could just put the... Yep.
There is an arc, a moral compass, charting freedom's wax and wane. Sometimes we're startled how that arc allows some things hard to explain. But when the cause we fight is right, no matter what, we must persist. That arc is long and destroy justice when we resist. Oh, yeah.
There's an arc of moral compass charting freedom's waxing way. when we endure. Oh, Selma has taught us. Yes. Oh, yeah. And Selma has taught us how to protest and endure. Yeah. Oh, my God. Agitate. Oh, until. Just like Selma. Come on, choir and sing. Oh, sometimes. Dark is long and destroyed. Yeah. Oh, Selma taught us how to persist, resist. Selma has taught us. Oh, Selma has taught us how to fight hate and agitate. Oh, until. Oh, my God. I said until. Yeah. Listen here. We gotta march on. Yes, we do. And we gotta fight and pray. Oh, we gotta hold on. 'Cause we know God's gonna make a way. I know He will. We are soldiers. Oh, yes, we are. In the army of Christ. Oh, we're gonna fight on y'all. Hey, we're gonna do it until we die. Yes, we will. Just like Selma. Yeah. Oh, my God.
Amen. I hope that gave you a little encouragement for today. Thank you all so much. God bless.
Thank you.